I'll say this. I'm not panicking. Okay, I'm kind of panicking. I'm panicking a little bit. I think if you followed my tweets or watched my videos throughout the week, you saw that I was panicking just a little bit. And of course, I was panicking about our Detroit Tigers, who still in first place in the American League Central, still miraculously, I think, a game and a half behind the Blue Jays for the best record in the American League, which is, it shows how well this team played for so long that is still like they could reasonably, if they play well enough, get home field advantage in the American League playoffs. We are going to talk all about that. But before, let's get those show notes out of the way. Welcome into, I was about to say Chris and Company. Welcome into I'll Say This. Even though I already said the title. All right. We're on Twitter at Castellani 2014. We're on TikTok, getting close to 8,000. Hopefully we can get to 10K by the end of the year. That has been a major goal of ours for a while. We're getting pretty close. We're almost up 3,000 since the beginning of baseball season, which is very humbling. We are on YouTube. If you're watching us on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. We're available in Apple form. We're available. I'm fucking this up bad. We're available in audio form on Apple Podcasts, and we're available in audio form on Spotify. All right. Let's get down to the nitty-gritty. Ugly, but I would say weirdly salvageable week of Tiger baseball, just in the sense they did go 3-3. It felt worse because the games that they lost were blowouts, and they played ugly baseball. Ugly baseball to me qualifies as just like giving up a lot of home runs, poor pitching. I don't recall a ton of, outside of Jahmai Jones, who acted like he got shot in the middle of running a route to left field. I mean, that was a terrible one in the Saturday game. They didn't play awful defense or anything like that, just poor execution on the pitches, giving up a ton of home runs. They lose a series at home to the lowly Twins, which is just shocking. I mean, the Twins, that's a team that is at a point in the season where when you see them on the schedule, given what they've lost or traded away or just don't have available, I mean, Byron Buxton was on the IL at the time. That's a team that you're thinking sweep against. You win the first two games, don't even come close to winning the next two, and then you have a series against the Angels where you get a massive moment. Skubal was off his game, and you get a massive swing from Matt Vierling, who homered to put the Tigers in front, then was promptly put back on the IL 2 days later. No word on how long he's going to be out. Hits a 3-run home run, his first of the season, to put the Tigers in front. You thought, okay, maybe this is a moment. Maybe this is the beginning of a streak. Maybe they finally got the cobwebs out. The Angels aren't very good, and they responded the next day by getting popped. Charlie Morton gives up 6 earned runs. I mean, leaves 2 breaking balls right over the heart of the plate that get completely crushed. And while the Tigers did respond with an emphatic victory on Sunday, winning the series against Los Angeles and ultimately splitting the homestand going 3-3, they lost 2 games in the division this week. It actually got down to 5 at one point. Thankfully, the Tigers won on Sunday and the Guardians lost, so they're now 6 games up as Detroit will go to Rate Field to play the Southsiders starting on Monday. Look, people are going to ask me how I feel about it, and it's strange because there's how you look at it through the lens of World Series and how you look at it through the lens of American League Central. Sadly, and I understand weird things happen in October. I do. I've said that a million times. I think generally speaking, a better outline or a better template to determine the real effectiveness of a team is what they do over a 162 game sample size. So anything can happen. With that said, I think generally speaking, when we talk about anything happening, it is more in regard to a team that has a good pitching staff. 2 years ago, you had a Diamondbacks team that won 84 games, made it all the way to the World Series. Well, they had Gallen and Kelly at the front of that rotation, and they had a good back end of that bullpen with Ginkel, and they had Paul Sewald, who's going to be making his Tigers debut hopefully at some point in the next month. This is a roundabout way of saying that the Tigers, unless AJ just manages a masterpiece where he literally avoids using half his bullpen in a 5 to 7 game series, they don't have the staff to win in October. I just don't see it. And it's lowered the ceiling for this team. And we will talk about the front office and the trade deadline and the massive amount of air that was let out of the balloon. But then you do shift your focus to, okay, look, those first 4 months of the season mattered. They played out of their minds. They won a ton of games, had the best record in baseball for a long stretch, had 6 All-Stars. Are they still good enough to hold off the Cleveland Guardians? I'm going to continue to say yes. I think that this is going to be one of those things that hopefully we get to the end of the year and we say, God, this divisional race was never as close as we thought it was. It feels close now. It feels like Cleveland's breathing down your neck. Maybe it's because it's a familiar opponent, obviously, in the Guardians, who beat you and knocked you out of the playoffs last year and continue to pretty consistently give you a tough time. Or maybe it's just because you've been more often than not in free fall for the better part of a month, and you don't have a pitching staff that, unless you have Tarek Skubal on the mound, and even he showed that he was human on Friday, you just don't feel good about right now. And it's been, I don't know, what is it, 10 games since the deadline, a week and a half, almost 2 weeks. We've gotten a good enough sample size where we can talk about this stuff. Now, normally I would say it's too early, but the fact is you judge deadline acquisitions much differently than you judge free agent acquisitions, just because Glaber, right? Let's say Glaber, now he got off to a great start, but let's say Glaber had a bad first 2 weeks with the Tigers this year. Well, you know what? It's a 162 game season. You got to let these things play out. This is much more of a sprint than it is a marathon. These deadline acquisitions, these are guys that you're only going to be seeing for 50, 40 something games. If they're pitchers, you're going to see them way less than that. Right. So we can kind of get to a point where we can judge them, somewhat effectively. Do I think things can get better? Of course. I mean, I would argue they almost can't get much worse, but I was disappointed by the return at the deadline. I think many of us were disappointed by the return at the deadline. But the one thing I did say was, look, over the last calendar year, there has been, I don't think any team in baseball, going back to that gritty Tigers run at the end of last summer, that had a better record or has had a better record than the Tigers have. And a lot of that stems from taking on these pitching projects that people believe to be tin cans and turning them into gold. Okay. That was all last year's run was. It was Gunther and Hannafy and Herder and Brisky, these guys who really weren't that effective any other time of their career, but were just firing darts when it mattered down the stretch last year. And so I am willing to, given the fact that the wins-losses record has been so good, willing to give the front office the benefit of the doubt and say, okay, let's give it a little bit and see if these guys have something. We're now about 2 weeks removed from the deadline, and there has been one positive. Kyle Finnegan, 3 appearances, 3 save opportunities. He's been masterful in each one. Only allowed 1 base runner. He's actually missed bats. He's collected strikeouts. Splitter looks good. Fastball looks good. Small sample size, right? But up to this point, 2 of those were 1-run games. And one of them was a highly emotional, game on Friday where Vierling had the home run, and then he came in and was, really, really tossing it well. In the 9th inning. That's a plus. But I think, and I know Vest has had his struggles a little bit lately, the very, very back end of the pen, the 9th inning guys, wasn't so much the concern come at the deadline. It was middle relief and setup relief. And right now, you went around the block to get next door. You are in the exact same position that you were a month ago, 2 weeks ago, 2 months ago, which is that once you get past Will Vest and Kyle Finnegan, there is not a single piece in this bullpen that you can consistently trust. Now, we got good Tyler Holton over the weekend. Okay, good to see, right? Troy Melton in long relief on Friday. Saved him, right? Troy Melton, God bless him, looks great. He's made 2 career relief appearances. 4 appearances, period, right? I mean, if we're putting our faith in Troy Melton to save this pen, and this is not meant to be a knock on him, he might pitch great, but man, that's pretty unfair. That's pretty unfair to a guy that's this early into his big league career, right? Rafael Montero doesn't have it. Paul Sewald still injured. Cody Hoyer gave up a home run. I mean, the number of home runs that this pitching staff gave up over this most recent week was shocking. I mean, gopher balls over the heart of the plate, hanging breaking balls, fastballs that were right down the dick. I mean, it was a poorly executed homestand from a pitching standpoint. Just absolutely terrible. And that even goes to the starters as well, because you look at your other deadline acquisitions. There's Chris Paddock, who got completely rocked against his former team in Minnesota. And there's Charlie Morton, who, despite getting double-digit strikeouts, gave up 6 runs against the Angels on Saturday. I'm not going to twist it into a positive. I'll just say, outside of Finnegan, the one deadline acquisition that I do still think could be something is Morton. And look, 6 runs, that's a terrible start. Okay, I'm not trying to twist it into a positive. Like I said, that's, he threw 2 terrible curveballs over the heart of the plate. But at least the swing and miss was there enough for me to say, okay, maybe there's something. Maybe he can be a 3rd, 4th starter for the last 40 games of the season. Paddock wasn't missing bats at all, and they were just teeing off on him in that game that he pitched a week ago. So the point I'm trying to make is that we are now back to AJ having to chess piece his way through another latter part of the season, much like he did a year ago. A year ago, they were in a place where they basically had 1 starter, 2 if you include Montero, who did give them some good starts down the stretch. But once you went beyond that, it was bullpen day after bullpen day, matchup play after matchup play, chess match after chess match. And you thought, given the way that they started this season, the way that they played through the first 100 games of the season, that moves would be made to make AJ's job a little bit easier come deadline time. I would argue it's more difficult. Because the fact is, Sunday's game was a prime example. You're teeing off on the Angels, right? It's a 7-0 game. This is with an average bullpen. You're looking at this saying, hey, we're going to cruise to this. This is all going to be wonderful and dandy. Mize gives up the 2-run shot. He only lasts 5. And then who are your best options? You turn it over to Canely and Montero. I mean, 2 guys who Canely has got to be close to getting DFA'd. He's got to be. The guy cannot get out of his own way. He's overused. He looks like a pitcher. He looks like Maeda did, which is a guy whose stuff is just completely toast. He's not commanding the ball. When he is commanding the ball, he's giving up hard contact. He's done. Then you turn it over to Montero, who outside of the 2 double plays he got, couldn't throw strikes. You got Vest for it wasn't a 4-out save technically, but he had to get the final 4 outs of that game just to make sure that you held down a 4-run game against the Angels. I mean, that's where your pitching staff lies right now. And yeah, do I think that you can still get a better version of Flaherty? Yeah, I just think this is who he is. He's inconsistent as hell. Mize has been better his last 2 outings, but I think what made this team so dangerous last year and where they really kind of fell in love with that identity was the fact that they were able to play the matchups. And outside of the Scooble starts, there were entire playoff games where a team wouldn't see the same pitcher twice in a game. It was just turning it over, keep spinning the reliever wheel. And I think they really fell in love with that identity. And I would argue, I wouldn't take back that run. It was so much fun. It was amazing. It was really a lot of 10 years worth of frustration kind of coming out. The Tigers made the playoffs and won a playoff series. I would argue in some ways it was the worst thing that happened to him because that was the result of incredible management by AJ, tremendous work by this pitching staff, getting the most out of coaching staff, getting the most out of these pitchers, getting them to throw strikes, getting them to pitch in high leverage, getting them to believe and buy in. It was incredible. And, okay, this is just the truth. A little bit of luck. Okay. You're down 3-0 with the bases loaded. Parker Meadows hits a grand slam. Those things those things don't happen. They had the train rolling so fast that by the time you got to late September, nobody wanted to step in front of it because you couldn't stop it. Right. That's just what happened a year ago. And in a small sample size, it was about a month and a half, they found a way to make it work. That idea, the idea of having this pitching committee, fixing these projects, masking their flaws, and having every guy pitching good baseball at the same time is a 1 in a million thing that we might not see again in baseball for another 20, 30 years. I know the role of the starting pitcher has changed a ton. I have a very hard time believing in the near future we're going to see another team besides the 2024 Tigers make it to the postseason, get that hot with 1 starting pitcher, even if that starting pitcher is Tarek Skubal good. And the point I'm trying to make is, as fun as that run was, I think they fell under this belief that they could, in some capacity, do it again. We don't need to be super aggressive at the deadline because what we have in-house is good enough to fix people. And it speaks to something I brought up on my post-game video on Saturday, which is I almost feel like there's too much pressure and too much trust being put in Chris Fetter, because the fact is we've seen it. We've seen him take certain guys that we didn't think much of and they pitched great. Holton was the man for 2 years, right? I mean, you go back to, Gregory Soto pitched his best baseball here. He's always been a mess and was your closer. Lang pitched his best baseball. Foley found it here. Like there's so many examples, right? But the fact is those guys had good stuff. And you look at where they're at now. Chris Fetter can't baby these guys. He can't walk on the mound and teach them how to throw pitches, right? Either you have the mechanics and the consistency to throw strikes or you don't. Either you have the ability to strike guys out or you don't. And I think that what's happened up to this point in the second half is you have a front office that put a ton of trust in their coaching staff to work miracles again. And I think that that's unfair. And I think that from a psychological standpoint, I think that kind of hits the players to a certain extent, because I think that probably in their minds, the guys in the clubhouse who've been here the last year and a half felt like, man, we have done more than enough to earn your trust. Let's go make a move. Let's really upgrade. And no, that's not saying giving up McGonigal or Max Clark, but man, you cannot convince me, and you will never convince me that the best this team could have come away with at the deadline was Paddock, Morton, Finnegan, Montero, and Seawald. I just don't believe that. I think you could have made a stronger push, even without having to sell the farm. And I know I'm spending a huge majority of the show talking about this, but this is going to be the storyline for the rest of the season. When they lose in October, it will be because the pitching staff blows up. If they lose this division, it will be because the pitching staff blows up. And I said it on Saturday, regardless of how this year ends, and I do still think they can win the division and will win the division, which is a step in the right direction. That deadline is going to haunt Scott Harris. Unless Clark, McGonigal, and Briseño are making all-star games consistently for the next decade. In that case, he can look at us with a finger, a shape of an L on his forehead, okay? Because we'll have gotten it wrong. But right now, I think there's a lot of hubris involved at that front office, believing that we didn't have to be super aggressive because we can fix what we got. Nothing's guaranteed in this game. And there's no guarantee that a year from now, you're going to have another 9-game lead. It's dangerous territory. But there were positives this week. Kerry Carpenter was unbelievable, right? Seems like he's finally back to full health. Hopefully they start playing him every day. Riley Green's starting to break out of a slump. Torque had some big hits. Vierling was actually seeming like he was getting going until he got put on the injured list again. I do think this offense is good enough to carry them for the better part of 40 games to hopefully a division championship. It's very rare that you have an offense that slugs its way to a World Series. You need some semblance of pitching. And unless Tarek Skubal is going to pitch like Tarek Skubal every other day, I just don't think that you have that with the group that you have right now. I just don't think that you have the horses. And it's led to me low expectations. Do I view it as a missed opportunity? I think this team's been above their pay grade all year. And because of that, that's why I wanted to see them kind of go for it and feel like, man, you've really gotten some magic here. Go do it, man. Make some moves. And they didn't. So we'll see where it goes. I brought him up a second ago, but I do want to talk about Kerry Carpenter really quick because he had a monster homestand, carried them offensively, no pun intended, in many ways. Seems like he's finally back to full health. Seems like he's mashing. And the point that I've brought up, which I think is bizarre, is the fact that Kerry gets reps against lefties if he continues to mash against righties. AJ's stubbornness in this case, because this is the third year in a row we've had this argument, and it's the second year in a row in which Kerry's come off the IL and provided a huge spark for this offense. And the question will remain: at what point does AJ trust him enough to give him at bats against lefties? And we've seen him do it, but I think it's not so much the at-bats, it's starting him, putting him in the lineup every day. And to Kerry's credit, hasn't complained about it. I mean, it's a weird, bizarre conundrum, and people are going to ask me, and they're going to continue to ask. I think as long as you have moments like what you had on Friday with Matt Vierling pinch hitting and hitting the 3-run home run, I think that AJ just believes that this is part of the identity of this club and that it's worked. And this is one thing that he brought up to me when I interviewed him. He said, a lot of people take it as me saying Kerry isn't good enough. No, it's me saying that other guys are better, that against a lefty, Vierling, prior to the injury, or Jahmai Jones is better. And throughout a season, I do generally agree with that. And I don't bitch about this as much as I used to, because the fact is, you look at his career numbers, only 159 at-bats, but Kerry Carpenter has a 608 OPS against left-handed pitching. It's about 890 against righties. So he's a completely different player. At the same time, when you're talking about a guy who is that red hot, I am a believer in that. I know that analytics department, and I'm not saying AJ abides by this, I know that analytics departments like to abide by this notion that momentum doesn't exist in baseball. I think that's silly. I think that's pure silliness. Not pure silliness. I'll say it's wrong. I think that's wild to believe that. I've seen guys who are just hot and they stay. Look at Riley Green. When Riley Green's feeling it, he could be going up against righties, lefties. He could be facing prime Pedro Martinez and Randy Johnson. He'd be hitting the ball. When he's struggling, you could throw Matt or what's his name, Ryan Carpenter out there. He'd be striking out, right? Especially because he was a lefty. I do believe in momentum in this game, and for that reason, I would like to see Carey get more consistent reps against left-handers. That doesn't mean if you want to pinch hit for him at some point during the game, fine. But it's just like, prove to me that he's awful. Because I just at 159 at-bat sample size with not a whole lot of starts woven in, I don't think that's big enough. And he was okay against lefties in the minors. Okay enough where I'm surprised he's this much of a platoon guy. But he's the weapon they deploy off the bench. He's been their guy. Last thing I want to talk about is a little bit of Lions preseason football. And, I wanted to spend a majority of the segment discussing Hendon Hooker and the fact that the Lions just simply don't have a backup quarterback. But sadly, that all took a backseat to what happened in the second half of the game on Friday. Maurice Norris, safety for the Lions, took a devastating hit, was down on the field, had to be carted off, was breathing but was not moving when he was carted off, immediately taken to the hospital. Falcons and Lions agreed to basically just sit on the ball and suspend play for the remainder of the game, which is a move I agree with. I'd agree with that, honestly, even if it was the regular season. I mean, we saw it happen with Damar Hamlin again between the Bengals and Bills several years back. I think Raheem Morris and Dan Campbell made the right decision. You feel, you just feel a emptiness in the pit of your stomach when you see stuff like that. I mean, this is such a violent game, and it's that point in the season where everything is so delicate. Guys are just trying to make their way onto the team, and so you absolutely wish the best for him. It seems like in recent days we've gotten some positive reports, which is nice to see. The end result of the game, I mean, I do you really want me to spend time, talking about what happened in a preseason game? Wins and losses, I think are basically irrelevant when we're at this juncture. So obviously, you wish him nothing but the best, but to focus on less serious matters, there were some football things to discuss. More injuries. Lions cornerback Enos Rakestraw, second round pick a few years back. It was the 24 draft, actually. Injured shoulder, requires surgery, going to be out for the season, basically missing his second straight campaign. And, Mike Valenti talked about it, and I don't think he's being hyperbolic. Sadly, given how fragile life is in this game, you kind of wonder if there is a future for him with the Lions, just because guys who aren't able to stay on the field their first two seasons typically aren't going to get a whole lot healthier. Obviously you hope that I'm wrong about that statement, but this is something that just continues. The Lions injury bug reared its ugly head a million different times. I mean, I don't think I've ever used this phrase. They were historically injured a year ago. I mean, they had more guys on injured reserve than any other team ever by like a lot. I don't think I'm wrong with that either. I think at one point they had 3 times as many players on the IR than any other team in the NFL. And obviously you're at a point in the season, with it being just preseason, where you just hope everyone can get through it at full health. Doesn't seem like that's going to be the case. The only other thing, and this isn't injury related, the only other thing that I will talk about is, and people have been focusing on it, is that as brilliant of a job as Brad Holmes has done with his draft picks, and look, nobody bats 1,000, right? I'm not. This doesn't change my opinion on Brad Holmes. Whatever belief they might have had that Hendon Hooker could be a positive or solid fill-in for Jared Goff, or maybe even, I don't think they ever thought this, maybe even the future here, you got to really start questioning that. Watching the snaps that I watched and have watched of him in the preseason, that does not look like an NFL quarterback. I mean, it looks like a guy who's not confident, a guy who's skittish in the pocket. You never know in this game, and with quarterbacks especially. I mean, you've seen guys get drafted in weird positions, but they end up falling to the right team. They end up playing really well or having great careers. You see guys who get drafted number 1 overall and never really develop. But the whole idea of let's take a flyer out on a 3rd, 4th round quarterback, hoping that they can develop him. I feel like more often than not, those guys end up becoming Jimmy Clausen. Those guys end up becoming Christian Hackenberg, or it looks like in this case, a Hendon Hooker. And again, it speaks to the point that I brought up last week, which is, if Goff goes down there in serious trouble, I do want to reiterate, you can say that about every team. And if Goff is out long-term, the same way that any quarterback is out long-term, it's a huge problem. The point I was trying to make is that in a pinch, there are certain teams that can have a backup quarterback that can come in for as many as 3-4 games and tread water. Unless you go out and sign somebody, it doesn't look like you have that with Hendon Hooker. And so that's a problem. Everything else, there's nothing else really to discuss beyond that game. We'll do a full Lions preview at some point this season, kind of break down the schedule, but I feel like I've talked plenty about it. It's preseason. All right. Well, that'll do it for today's show. You can follow me on Twitter at Castellani 2014. We are on YouTube. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. If you want to find us in audio form, you can find us on Apple Podcasts. You can find us on Spotify. I forgot to mention this in the opening. CastellaniContent.com. That's getting updated every day with episodes of I'll Say This. It's getting updated every day with Tiger videos, with Chris and Company episodes, everything that Austin and I create. And of course, shout out to my good friend, Austin Sisler, who continues to do a remarkable job as our producer. Stick with us. Stick with the Tigers. We're entering soon to be a very fun year for sports because we're going to have a baseball team that's playing for something. We got some football teams that are going to be playing for something. So never fear. The dog days are going to be coming to a close before you know it. All right. Appreciate all the support, guys. Love you to death. Talk to you soon. Peace and happiness.